So we'll now take questions.
As usual, I have a question. And I want to preface it by expressing my appreciation for the work that all of you are doing to make people aware of this. When you live with something like this long enough, you forget that there are people who don't know about it. So I think it really is important. But the Holocaust wasn't ended by rallies or by people being shocked and sad. It was ended by decisive, overwhelming military action by the major powers of the world. And I admit that I am troubled by the thought that diplomatic pressure is anything but a sop to our own consciences. The people in Sudan are not unaware of what is happening. It's not being done by accident. They're not unaware that it shocks our sensibilities. They just don't care because they don't think we're going to stop them. And the question is, are we actually prepared to do something? And by this, of course, I mean go in shooting or not. Because that's how the British ended the slave trade in the 19th century with the Royal Navy. That's how Canadians and others ended the Holocaust in the 20th century. Are we prepared to do that?
Okay, so basically, I think to start, we need to make the distinction between different situations. Many situations of ethnic cleansing, of genocide, of crimes against humanity, they do have parallels, but none of these situations are exactly the same. In the Holocaust, we're talking about a totally different situation. We're talking about a genocide taking place behind the veil of a world war. Two separate but related things. Here, we're talking about a government whose motto is basically divide and conquer, or divide and rule. And so the two are much closer linked here. And the reason why the government does this is mainly for two reasons, at least the best I've heard, and that's money and power. And so when your main concerns are those, you don't necessarily need to go in with guns blazing and to invade a country per se. You can work towards mediation efforts, towards peace building, and that really can get you to where you need to be. The big problem with Darfur and with Sudan as a whole is that people have been rushing the process. The CPA took years and years to get to that point. The North-South War was the longest running civil war in Africa. We're not going to solve Darfur in a day. We're not going to solve Darfur in a month. And the Darfur peace agreement was moving along. Both sides were making concessions, both the government and two of the main negotiators on the rebel side, Abdul Wahid and Mini Manawi. And then all of a sudden, the UN came in and the big Western powers basically pushed things along and used the departing train tactic, saying that if you don't reach an agreement now, within days, we're leaving. We're not supporting this anymore. And so I think if you're patient and you realize you deal with the situation you've been handed and don't try and force things along in an unrealistic manner, that you can reach an agreement. There is a workable peace deal in the North and South. There's no reason why there can't be a workable peace agreement that meets everyone's main needs or desires in Darfur.
Well, yeah, and I have financial plans if I win the lottery too. But I mean, I know enough about rogue regimes to know what they do. They talk, and on the ground, they change the facts through brute force. And that's what's been happening in Sudan. And you've got to know this. If that works, great. You know, if we give them 10, 15, 20 years of talk and they don't finish the process of repopulating, then maybe we get a workable deal. But that's not normally what happens. You know, that is not what happened in Germany. It didn't happen in the Ukraine. It didn't happen in Rwanda. You know, it just, basically that scenario doesn't happen. And what if it doesn't work, right? How long do you want to give them? How many years? Because one thing is, you haven't got the other alternative. And I'm not trying to be harsh here. I understand the limitations, but there are on the podium two members of two parties who want us out of Afghanistan. And it's hard to find a more loathsome regime than the Taliban, or one that understands the barrel of a gun better than they do. Who are we kidding? Right? Talk is cheap. We're across an ocean from this stuff. People are dying over there. What are we actually going to do?
Well, I'm going to, where do I start? But I'd be very, well, yeah, and that's fine. And you know what? Turn the corner on that in our party. What I want to be very clear on, John, is that talking about divestment, I'm going to give you another example, not World War II, but the 1980s when I was a student fighting against regime in South Africa. We used all the tools available as activists to get attention. One was divestment, making money the way people are now off of, basically it's blood money, investing in, right now they're looking at exploration of oil in Darfur, if you can imagine that. And that's under the radar. That needs to be outed, and people who are making money off of this kind of enterprise you have to cut off the oxygen, if you will. That's the money that's going to the regime. The other thing is, no one's talking about sending in the Boy Scouts here. This isn't wimpy stuff. This is exactly what Canada's about, exactly what the responsibility to protect is about, and exactly what we should be doing. The counterinsurgency mission in the south of Afghanistan is the wrong mission for Canada, and going into Darfur and supporting this robust 26,000 peacekeeping, peace-building effort is exactly what we should be doing. And this isn't for wussies, if you want to put it that way, and I'll be blunt. It's not, and I agree. It's something we have to take on and confront, including in my party, in the Liberal Party, Conservative Party, and in our country as a whole. Thank you.
So to build on those comments, I would like to say that in parallel to this, we are sending in UNIMID. The spots are spoken for. 26,000 troops, or should I say 19,000 troops and 7,000 police, they've been spoken for. So as Bakary was talking about before, people want to go back to their homes, but they don't feel safe. They don't feel secure. So if people can go back to their homes and we deploy UNIMID and UNIMID protects the populated areas, then we do have ways of toning down the violence that is going on and containing what is taking place there and discouraging the Janjaweed from burning villages to the ground, doing things like throwing corpses into wells to make sure no one ever goes back there. So it's not something that's happening on its own. Just like Mr. Dewar spoke about, in parallel, we are hoping to establish short-term stability to be able to have long-term peace and security in Darfur.
Well, your initial question was whether or not the world reacted forcefully enough. Absolutely not. And not within a time frame that would have prevented more death. As was mentioned, there are different sets of circumstances. When you take a look at the passage of the R2P principle, responsibility to protect, it was a statement of principle, but we didn't work out all the details. Under what sort of circumstances do we act? A similar argument was used by Mr. Bush with Iraq. Now, what they haven't laid out is how do we differentiate? How do we differentiate between an odious totalitarian regime that abuses its power and destroys the lives of its citizenry? What and how do we react under those circumstances? What are our responsibilities clearly to human beings in those sets of circumstances? And what do we do under the extreme circumstance of genocide? And that's what we're talking about here in Darfur. And I think we could have acted more forcefully. Now, there are different types of genocide. It's a horrific topic to discuss, but there's the most primitive form, a hurricane of hatred, where one tribe descends on another, what we saw in Rwanda, and what we saw the beginnings of in Darfur. Well, we should be compelled, and there should be clear guidelines that say that we're compelled to act immediately. In situations of a genocide by attrition, and that was the second phase of what we saw in Darfur, that provides for an opportunity. Now, it shouldn't drag on forever, and as you'd referenced, the Sudanese government have become expert at finding ways to block, delay, etc. But we did drop the ball. For instance, we could have prevented airplanes from dropping, Sudanese Air Force planes from dropping bombs onto these villages and providing air cover. When I landed in El Fasher, we saw Sudanese Air Force planes on the same runway that we saw African Union peacekeeping helicopters. And when I questioned what's going on here, I was told, well, we have a no-fly block of time. So it was actually the African Union that was blocked from flying at certain times of the day, during which the Sudanese Air Force planes would lift off and most likely strafe or bomb villages. We dropped the ball in those sorts of circumstances. We could have acted more forcefully. I'm a big believer in finding negotiated diplomatic solutions, but there are three components to the issue in Darfur. The humanitarian, we had to guarantee that those camps would be fed by the NGOs. Those hundreds of thousands of children and women, the most vulnerable in society, were incredibly at risk. Largely, we were able to achieve that. There was the security military component. We failed on certain levels, but at least we were able to put that AMIS mission in, and we shouldn't lose sight. Canada played a critical role. We dedicated about $200 million, and I had mentioned when I'd arrived at El Fasher, it was Canadian Armed Forces personnel that met me, and they were providing the logistics and the support for the AMIS mission. It wasn't perfect. It was far from perfect, and it wasn't nearly as effective as it could be. But we as Canadians were, in fact, making a difference at that point in time. We should continue making a difference. And then there's a final component, a long-term diplomatic negotiated solution to the problems in Darfur and within Sudan. And that will take patience. But that should not preclude us using force and muscle where we can and appropriately at the appropriate times. Thank you.
I just want to add up something to the to my colleagues who are asking for patience. There are two questions. Those people who are in the camps now, the new generations, after 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years from now, the question is, would they be able to go back and live in the camps after they get used to the new way of living in the camps? The other question is, those people who've been brought from outside of Sudan to the areas that's already been displaced, what's going to happen to them? Like when these people come back to their areas and then there are already other people living there, like in 5 years from now or 2 years from now, what's going to happen to these people? I have no question for that, but that's another time-bound problem. It's going to happen also in the future.